Good morning and welcome to the Audit Committee meeting. My apologies for taking us behind. Oh, I apologize. I said good morning. Apologize for starting behind. It's nice to see everyone in person, and we would like to officially call the meeting to order. A reminder that this meeting is being recorded, and I would like to ask our committee coordinator, Mr. Eward, if he would call the roll, please.
Sure. Broughton,
Present.
Chen, Shelby,
Present.
Tony.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Excellent. Next on the agenda is a call for public comment. State Bar staff will attempt to call members of the public in order that they appear in the attendee pool. Again, for those who are participating via Zoom, you should have a function for virtually raising your hand. It is the hand icon at the bottom center of your screen. If you wish to address the committee, please click the hand icon and State Bar staff will call on you in the order that your hand is raised. For those who are participating by telephone, you may virtually raise your hand by pressing *9. That is the *9 key. And again, this will alert the staff that you would like to make a comment. They will call on you and we will open your microphone accordingly. Due to time restrictions, we cannot allow more than 3 minutes for each speaker. Please note the staff will have an on-screen countdown timer visible to all attendees during the duration of your public comment. Again, the timer's 3-minute countdown will begin as soon as you start your remarks, and you will verbally be alerted once you have 30 seconds remaining. Mr. Eward, is there anyone for public comment today?
There is not at this time.
What? No public comment at our ending audit committee meeting. That is excellent. Next, we will have...
Melanie,
Yes.
Someone raised their hand.
Oh, thankfully. I thought we were going out differently. Let's see.
Okay, it's Ray Hayden.
Hayden.
Hayden,
Thank you, sir.
you have 3 minutes.
I wanted to compliment the previous committee's meeting, and I'm going to address some of that stuff in the Board of Trustees meeting later on. As far as finances go, I see that Ms. Wilson is there, so I'll be addressing a couple of those things again. But I didn't want you to leave you hanging without a comment on your last one. I just had to tell you we're here, we're watching, we're rooting for you, and I just wanted to, I in advance, I'm going to say have a great meeting, and I hope you have a good one like they did earlier today. Just everything seems to be working out well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hayden. We are pleased that you were here and watching, so thank you. Next, we will have a chair's report. First and foremost, before we even begin, I just want to send the deepest condolences and sympathies to our colleague that we lost, Mr. Greg Knoll. As you all know, Greg was on the audit committee, and so his presence today is definitely going to be missed. And so if we could just take a moment of silence in his honor, that would be wonderful. Greg, your energy and your spirit will be missed. This, in fact, is my last meeting as chair, and I want to say thank you so very much to my colleagues. I remember when we weren't scheduling audit committee meetings on a regular basis, and then I remember when our meetings were running 90 minutes, well, maybe not 90, but 60. And so it's been a pleasure serving as your audit chair. I am confident that the person coming behind me will build and expand beyond the work that we have done here, and so I'm very excited to see that. And then last but not least, I would like to take this opportunity to really acknowledge my partner, and that is Justin Eward. Justin and I have the opportunity to get together every 2 weeks to talk about the Audit Committee. And Justin, it has been a pleasure to serve with you. You are a consummate professional, and I know we won't be on audit together, but I'm confident we'll be doing other things at the State Bar together. And so I just want to say thank you so very much for all that you do on behalf of the Audit Committee and myself as chair. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we will have the minutes. And I want to, let's see here. Let me do this appropriately. Give me one moment, please. Next, we will have the approval of the minutes, and that is from the July 20th meeting, the open session minutes. Does any member of the committee have any changes? If not, I will entertain a motion and a second, please.
Move to accept.
Moved by Mr. Tony. Accepted by Ms. Shelby. I think that's appropriate. Can you take the roll, please?
Broughton,
Abstain.
Chen, Shelby,
Aye.
Tony.
Aye.
That's 2 ayes, 1 abstention. The minutes pass.
Thank you. Next, we have the consent items. I'd like to ask if there is any member who would wish to pull the consent items. Let's see here. And that is approval of the Q2 2023 Board and Management Travel Expenses Report. If there are no changes or comments, I would like to ask for someone to make a motion and a second to approve.
I move to approve.
Mr. Tony
Second.
and Mr. Broughton, second. Mr. Ewert, can you call the roll, please?
Broughton,
Yes.
Chen, Shelby,
Aye.
Tony.
Aye.
That is 3 ayes, 1 absent. The motion passes.
Thank you. Next, we will have agenda item 4, which is business A, and that is the review. We're reviewing the results of the 2023 single audit. And I believe this morning we have one presenter joining us. Let's see here. And that is Rocio Avalos. I hope I said that correctly. Avalos?
Yes, thank you
Good
so much.
morning and
Good
welcome.
morning. Thank you. I'm Rocio Avalos, Program Director with the Office of Access and Inclusion. And joining me to present the results of the single audit will be Mr. David Bullock, a partner at MGO. I don't know if he's on and we could promote him.
We want to welcome Mr. Bullock to the Audit Committee. He is certainly no stranger here.
Morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. And so before I hand it off to David to talk about the single audit and the results, just want to provide, excuse me, a little bit of background. So one of the functions of the Office of Access and Inclusion is to administer grants to legal aid nonprofits to provide free civil legal services to low-income Californians. And 2 of the grants that we're currently administering are federal awards. Both awards are received through pass-through agencies. One is focused on homelessness prevention, grants distributed by our office to these nonprofits and passed through the Judicial Council of California. And the second focused on foreclosure prevention and homeownership retention, passed through the California Housing Finance Agency. Both of these funds were to support those experiencing financial hardships related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And they are both individually multi-year awards of 3 years. And fiscal year ending in 2022 was the first year that we triggered the single audit requirement for non-federal entities, which is in any fiscal year when we spend more than $750,000 in fiscal year ending 2022, we distributed almost 30 million in these two federal awards combined. The single audit, which Mr. Bullock will walk us through, did conclude no findings or question costs of those federal awards. But as you may have seen in the meeting materials, the report itself does include 2 previous findings related to IT internal control related to financial reporting. And so those 2 significant deficiencies were previously presented to this committee in April, as well as the corrective action plans. But just wanted to provide that recap, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But other than that, we'll pass it to Mr. Bullock to walk us through the single audit and results.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rocio. So I would just add, first of all, I would consider this the 2022 single audit, even though it's not due until September 30th of 2023. And just as by way of background, it used to be that federal grants were audited individually by all the various federal agencies, and it really became burdensome to the recipient of those grants. And so the law passed in 1984, which is now a little bit aged, but that's the Single Audit Act that was passed that required these federal programs to be audited as one consolidated audit. So that's why it's called the single audit. But all it simply is just an audit of federal money. And as Rocio pointed out, this is your first single audit that you've had because you haven't in the past exceeded $750,000 in grant spending. And the focus is on spending, not on receiving. So you actually received the initial grant back in 2021, but you didn't spend enough to require a single audit until this calendar year of 2022. So we're here today to talk about the 2 grants. If you look at the single audit, it's a report that is a standalone report, meaning that it encompasses both a financial and federal compliance components to it. And that's why we're bringing back the 2 findings that we reported as part of the financial statement audit, because the single audit is both a financial and compliance audit. The financial audit relates to the federal money spent, and there's a schedule of expenditures of federal awards, and that is audited in relation to the financial statement. So that's where the financial statement audit comes into play. So if you look, I don't know if you want to follow along with me, but if you look on page 1, that's the report under government audit standards, and that's the financial statement. Findings that we identified during the financial audit, and both had to do with IT policies and procedures. And so that was already communicated to you in your April packet, or your April financial statements. I think we presented that in May, actually. And I would just say that there's a very tight deadline for the state.
David, excuse
Yes.
me for one moment, please. Can you restate that the Wi-Fi froze up? You were talking about page 1, and then it froze up for a moment, and then it picked back up. So if you could just restate that again, that would be great for the record. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Yeah, my apologies. Hopefully my bandwidth here holds up. And so, yeah, the page 1 and page 2, the first independent auditor's report relate to government auditing standards, and that is related to the financial audit aspect of the single audit. And so basically, it's the same report that we issued back in April with the financial statements, and it communicates internal controls and compliance in general under the financial statement audit. And so in order for this report to be complete, we have to bring forward those findings that we had in relation to the financial statement audit. The second independent auditor's report that follows on pages 3 through 5 is the compliance aspect of the single audit report. And that's where we communicate the results of our compliance testing of the 2 programs that we tested. And I'm happy to report there were no findings, as Rocio mentioned, in relation to the federal awards. And so those monies were spent appropriately in accordance with the grant agreements. You know, both grant agreements are passed through different state agencies. And so they're not direct, you're not a direct recipient of the federal funds. And that's not uncommon. Oftentimes, money flows through the state, and then the state in turn flows it to those that are carrying out program objectives. And then, as you are doing, also, you know, further granting those out to other recipients as well. So the pages 3 through 5 really communicate the compliance of the federal program, and then the next schedule, the next page that's important is page 7, and that communicates what transpired during calendar year 2022. And you can see that you've spent a total of 30 million during the calendar year, and under both programs, you're just I think right under 52 million. And so you do have funds carrying over to future periods that'll be communicated in subsequent single audits. And also on the schedule, it communicates the name of the program and amounts that are passed through to subrecipients. And because so much of the grants or so much of these funds are passed through to subrecipients, there's a schedule included, or a note, included, note 5, starting on page 8, that you know, to improve transparency, you know, shows all of the recipients of these monies and what agencies they went to. So that's, to me, a valuable disclosure, because it lets you know how the money was spent throughout the state of California to the various agencies. And then on page 11, and this is another required schedule of the single audit, is basically the results of the single audit. It kind of summarizes, if you will, all the important aspects of the audit. And so the first section communicates, you know, the results of the audit, that we issued unmodified opinions. So that's real good. It identifies the programs that we tested. So we tested 2 major programs. We tested the Homeowner Assistance Fund program and the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds program. Both of those are very general programs at the federal level. These were COVID-19 related acts that produced that funding, you know, CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan, and among a few other laws that have passed at the federal level have really expanded and allowed for additional funds flowing through to state and local governments. And so we've seen a real significant increase in federal monies being spent for governments to recover during this pandemic. And these are more targeted towards the homelessness aspect of the COVID-19 impact. And so that summarizes the major programs that we tested. Then the following 2 pages, pages 12 and 13, communicate the financial statement findings that we had mentioned earlier, that was communicated as part of the financial statement audit. And just a little bit on timing, you know, the State Bar has a real tight timeline with its financial statements. It's a mandated deadline of 4 months after the end of the period. And so a lot of effort goes into closing the books by staff and us coming in and doing the audit. And it really didn't dictate enough time for us to conduct this single audit simultaneously with the financial statement audit. And so we did it subsequent. And that's not uncommon. Not uncommon. A lot of governments will focus on the financial statement audit first and then do the compliance audit. And the compliance audit for the single audit is a 9-month deadline. So you have until, again, September 30th of this year to finalize that. And then lastly, on page 13, at the end is just a section 3, and that just communicates that there were no findings on the federal compliance side. And then on page 15 is just management's responses. You know, anytime you have a finding in a single audit, there needs to be a corrective action plan on how you're going to address those findings identified. And so page 15 is management's response of how those deficiencies will be resolved. And that concludes my presentation of the single audit report. More than happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Bullock. Do any members of the Audit Committee have any questions or comments or responses? Excellent, thank you. And thank you, Rocio Avalos. It's a pleasure.
Likewise, thank you.
Next, our next item of business is a discussion item only. Or I should say a discussion item as well, regarding the independent financial auditor services selection. And this is an agenda item, discussion on the selection of the State Bar's independent financial auditing services, and it's being presented by our CFO, Araceli Montoyo Chico. Welcome.
Thank you, Melanie. I don't have a presentation. I just have I'll just quickly explain the process that we went through to select for the next several years our new auditor since the contract was up. Let me just pull up my notes here. So there's five components of audits that happen with whoever is the new independent auditor, and that's the financial statements that happens every year, the report and expenditure of mandatory fees, the legal services trust fund program report. Now that we're subject to the single audit due to the federal awards and expenditures, the single audit, and then every 5 years the internal control audit. So these are the five reports, that an auditor would be hired or engaged into to audit. So we started the process during the summer. During the summer, we asked for proposals from five. We received five proposals, to be submitted to the State Bar for new potential auditors. And there is a scoring sheet that we work with procurement to go through. So the process basically has different criteria, and each component is weighed differently. So for example, 10% of the scoring is based on the responsiveness of the proposal submission requests, based on what we asked for. Another percentage is, do they agree with the State Bar's contracting requirements? A heavier weight is obviously on the technical ability, the financial viability of the audit firm, and their flexibility to perform certain, the contract in a timely manner, and budget too, right? And also the cost of the proposal they submit as a cost of what their proposal is for the next 5 years. So each of those components is evaluated, and we had five evaluators. Obviously, the Office of Finance, we had most of the evaluators since we're the ones who are directly dealing with the state auditors, not the state auditors, the independent auditors, and as well as an individual from the Office of Access and Inclusion, since they're in charge of the single audit and the legal services trust fund report. So each of us scored all of the RFPs that we did receive independently. There were 20 factors that we considered, and we ranked them 1 through 5. We then compiled all of our scores together just to get an average, and then submitted to procurement, who then did the allocation of the weight. And all of our individual scores, we unanimously came up with the top independent firm, the same, and that's who we awarded the contract to, which was MGO again, and the contract is going to be up for approval at the next board meeting. And that's high level the process that we went through to request RFPs, to evaluate them, and then review them independently, and then based on the scoring, select who the top firm would be. Any questions I can answer on the process? Mark.
I appreciate you explaining the process. I have several issues with it. The first is that any audit committee I've ever served on, one of the primary responsibilities was to review and approve the selection of the auditor. That is an absolute core function of an audit committee. So I, as a matter of organizational best practices, do not believe it is appropriate for staff to make that decision. It belongs with the audit committee. So that's my first point. My second point is that 5 years is far too long to be awarding a contract for, and I'll tell you why. Part of the function of a committee to review a proposal is the accountability factor. Promises made versus promises kept. Because the terms of trustees are 4 years, any contract which exceeds the length of a term means that many, if not most, of the members of a committee 5 years hence will not have served on that committee 5 years prior, so have absolutely no knowledge of what had transpired. So it's just too long. 3 years, I believe, is much more appropriate time. And so that's the second. The third is when I had earlier in this process asked about what's the process, what's going to happen, when is the RFPs, when are the proposals, it was really my expectation that at this meeting we would be reviewing the top candidates and make a decision as the audit committee. And because I have some issues with MGO and how they've been doing their audits. And I never had a chance and never a forum to talk about that and say what they are. And so I object to being deprived of that when the contract's coming up. That's the perfect time to talk about it. I have held my comments that I have had and my questions about MGO till I thought was the appropriate time. And so before I go into what my recommendations, I want to start with that. I'm not right now going to go into the, and not this minute, maybe later we'll see, to the substance of my issues with MGO. But I, just wanted to pause there for any thoughts, comments, perhaps solutions.
I would like to clarify, I think I did say 5. The contract is 3 years with 2 one-year renewals. So we're signing the contract for 3 years, and after 3 years, if we choose not to renew, then for the next 2 years, right? Or the first year that's up for renewal, if we choose not to renew, we do have that option. So I want to
Thanks for that clarification. I missed that.
No, sorry, I think I said 5 years, but it's 3 years with 2 one-year renewals.
Were you going to respond to any other trustee Tony's comment?
I apologize. I misunderstood that you wanted to review it. I would have been happy to share it with you or with the audit committee, the proposals. We unanimously chose MGO and I would like to actually hear your concerns at some point.
Okay.
I don't know if this is.
I'm gonna go ahead and take a minute here. So I first want you to remind me about and I acknowledge that you weren't here 5 years ago. Okay, I'm gonna start off by that. Okay, so let's. You came in. There was a discussion at the last board meeting, last finance committee meeting, about a mid-year budget revision, and in it, you had a discussion about protocols of some changes you thought were an issue. One had to do something with accrued vacation accounting, and there was a second one. Could you review those two for me, what they were? I don't remember them exactly. I know you know what they are.
In terms of the financial statements,
Yes.
we at the end of every year we have to make accruals. Right. One of our biggest accruals that you see come on our books as actuals is vacation and sick. We have to estimate how much we think on a short-term and long-term basis that ends up on our financial statements in our short-term and long-term liabilities. How much accruals, how much liability we're on the hook for should employees leave, how much their vacation balances are. So I know that was the vacation and sick accrual. At the end of the year, we also make another accrual. I think I called it the payroll accrual. And it's just because that amount gets paid out in January, but a week of that, we get paid every 2 weeks. A week of that belongs in December, so we accrue that portion of salary expenditures that belongs in December as an accrual. But it got paid out in January or the following year, but 1 week belonged in December, so we accrue for those expenses.
So that was a practice that existed prior to your tenure, prior to you coming?
Correct. That's a practice that has to happen according to, for financial statement purposes, it's required under US GAAP, which is what our financials are prepared.
Right. But in terms of including them in the budget, that's the difference.
Correct. The budget is different from the financial statements, correct?
Right. And, I mean, part of it is, I'm concerned that MGO never made that recommendation, for instance, that we should change the way we do budgeting. I expect an auditor to provide advice for best practices. They have, as we saw in the previous presentation, the auditor has a section where there are significant deficiencies that are not material. And at least in the time I've been here, I didn't see that. But the point is that here's what I would like to see, and I want to know if this is something that you feel comfortable doing. If not, I'll make a motion. I would like to see the MGO approval for contract withdrawn from the consent calendar of the board meeting, and for the audit committee between this meeting and its next meeting be able to review the top 2 or 3 candidates and the information, and then at our next meeting, we will vote on who to award the contract to.
I just would want to make sure with Steve Mazer that we wouldn't be running afoul of any of our procurement policies, because I don't know what kind of notice has been provided to the vendor. That would be my only hesitation. I'd already talked to RSLE about not putting the contract on consent, understanding your concerns, but I don't know, Steve, if we are in a position to reconsider the award. I'm certainly open to that. Are we able to do that?
I mean, we can if we want to. We have not yet issued the formal notice of intent to award, waiting for approval. It is just as a matter of practice. It is generally the board is not involved in the selection of vendors. That has not really ever been our practice before. The board policy manual talks about board approval of contracts, but it would be very unusual, out of our regular practice, for the board to be directly involved in a vendor selection. That doesn't mean the board is not allowed to do so, but that has not been our practice. But in terms of awarding the contract, nothing is signed yet. So I mean, if we chose to hold it back and extend the process for further evaluation, we are within our right to do so.
So I think just to move this along, we should do that. And so we'll have to work out a process, Trustee Tony, to have the committee review the proposals, rescore them, and bring the issue forward at the appropriate time for a vote.
That would, I appreciate that. And so then it wouldn't be it would be withdrawn from the consent agenda.
Certainly, and it may not be, I mean, depending on the process that we have to work out, it may not be ready at all for November. I don't know.
I'm talking about today's agenda. It's on today's agenda in the consent.
Oh, I thought it was on for voting in November. Oh, okay. I misunderstood that.
When I reviewed, I look at the consent agendas. When I reviewed today's consent agenda, well, it doesn't say MGO, but it has their full name, which took me a minute to put the two together, because it's actually a long name with people's names. The MGO are associated with individual names.
Yes, that's my error. I
Oh.
misunderstood. I thought it was coming to the board in November. So, I did not understand that. Yes, well, obviously we'll need to pull that off consent.
Okay,
Okay.
all right, thank you.
One last point, Mark. I'll just say it's generally not in the purview of, as a former auditor, to review budgets. Obviously, if we ask the auditors for recommendations and suggestions, I would think that they should be able to give us some, but generally speaking, auditors don't typically audit or look at budgets. They focus on the financial statements, and our budget is a little bit different from how we compile our financial statements, which are on a full accrual basis. So just something to keep in mind.
Excellent. Any other comments or questions? Thank you. We will adjourn Audit Committee.